Welcome to US History 1302. So, this time period that we're going to begin is going to be after Reconstruction, which is after the Civil War, and it is focused on westward expansion. The picture that you're looking at right now is painted by John Gast in 1872, and the painting is actually called American Progress. What it represents historically is this idea of manifest destiny. So when you see this picture, if you're being tested, connect it with manifest destiny. Now looking at the picture, you see everything moving from east to west because it's western expansion. You see the buffalo heading west, the Indians, the bear, the men. The central figure is the woman who is symbolized in white for purity and virtue. She's the guiding spirit of progress. Okay, so she's floating westward. What is important is what she has in her hands. She has a telegraph cable and she has a book, a textbook. So she's symbolizing education, enlightenment. The telegraph wires are symbolizing the communication, the technology, all of these things that are new to this era. She's determined. All right. Everything, like I said, is moving from east to west, supporting this westward expansion. And if you look at the details of the picture, you have the train. I actually have two trains. You have cowboys. You have them chasing the buffalo. You have the Indians in the left-hand corner who are looking fearful of this new progress coming to them. And they're not fighting. They're just moving further and further away. And you have the miners, the farmers. So it is supporting this whole go west, young man, go conquer the west. The painting again is important to connect to the justification for westward expansion, which is manifest destiny. So before the mid-19th century, the land of the west of Mississippi was largely unexplored by most Americans. Most people considered this area just to be a wasteland. That's why they were so willingly to give it to the Indians. They didn't believe that it was suitable for any civilized person, and they're not thinking that the Indians are civilized. So they don't see it as a place of economic development. In 1840, attitudes begin to change dramatically. So it's going to be a combination of this economic opportunity and this ideological encouragement that's going to reshape how Americans start viewing the West. They now see the West not as this wasteland, but this promised land of fertile land for farming, new markets, a chance to bring thousands of settlers from the East into the West. So in order to achieve all of that, the federal government is going to start to offer incentives, just like you saw on the other slide. Go west, young man. That was a very famous thing that you would say, advertisement. So at this time, the federal government's going to offer different incentives for people to migrate to the West. They're going to offer land grants. They're going to offer policies on acquiring property easier. And remember, we had moved all of the Native Americans to this land that we had thought would be no good. So how this wraps to manifest destiny is that manifest destiny is going to be the justification now for moving the Eastern settlers west to take over the land that was given to the Indians, or sorry, Native Americans. And it's going to be under manifest destiny. And what manifest destiny is, the definition we use is the belief that Americans were destined, not only destined, but divinely ordained by God to expand across the continent. And manifest destiny argues that it was the nation's duty to spread these democratic institutions, these American values from the East Coast to the West Coast. And this political ideology is going to provide moral justification, political justification for westward expansion. And it's going to become this tool that's going to shape U.S. policy and public opinion. So, two major pieces of legislation are going to be created in 1862. This is going to transform the American landscape and the economy. The first one is the Homestead Act, and the second one will be the Pacific Railway Act. The Homestead Act is very important that you remember what it is. What it is, it's going to be designed to encourage westward expansion. So to encourage these people who live in the East, the Americans who live in the East, to move westward. And what they're going to do is they're going to offer 160 acres of land in the West to any head of household or any individual over the age of 21. And it's going to include unmarried women, which was unheard of. So they're going to offer these 160 acres at pretty much no cost at all. So you could get this huge acreage, and all you had to do was go west, get your land, and start to improve the land. So you had 5 years to improve the land. And what that was, it was considered you would make a home, you would start farming, the property would be productive, and that's all you had to do to get these 160 acres. So this Homestead Act is going to open up just vast areas of the West to be settled, and it's going to help shape the future of agriculture and that economy that supports agriculture, and it's going to really define what this region is. And we're going to go into a little bit later the difficulties of the land, the lack of resources that it had. All right, so the Pacific Railway Act, it's passed at the same year, and it also is equally transformative. So what it's going to do is it's going to authorize the construction of a transcontinental, so across the continent, transcontinental railroad. And it's going to be directing the Union Pacific Railway to lay tracks westward from the Missouri River. What they're going to do is they're going to provide land grants and government bonds. That's what the government's doing, giving land grants and government bonds. And it's going to speed up the construction, and it's going to create a transportation network that will link the eastern and western coast. Okay, so from the Pacific coast to the Atlantic coast. So this is going to allow communication, and it's going to allow for these two areas with this tremendous amount of land and space between them to come together more efficiently and faster. So both acts are done by the federal government, and it's seen as a commitment to expansion, especially coming off of the Civil War. So it's laying this foundation for both large-scale settlement and kind of a unify of the national economy, kind of bring everybody back together as one. So as these opportunities open up, nearly 400,000 settlers are going to start to create the journey west. And you're going to have migrants who are men seeking new opportunities. You have families who are traveling west hoping to build a better life on the frontier. You're going to have immigrants who are going to play a major role in this whole movement and also in building the railways. You're going to have Northern Europe, Canada, Germany. A large part of Irish settlers are often going to move west, and they're going to create these very tight-knit rural communities. And they're going to actually preserve their culture and their traditions as they assimilate into a frontier-type life. Another important group were called the exodusters, Exodusters. Those are thousands of African Americans who moved west after the Civil War. So they're fleeing this racism and violence of the Old South, and they're moving to a land of new economic opportunities. So their name is in reference to the biblical chapter, Exodus, and it symbolizes their hope for freedom and equality and really just a new start. So, although there's all this promise and hope of moving west, this actually very harsh reality is that it's very hard. It's a very hard land to try and farm. If you look down at the picture, that's a sod hut. There's such a lack of resources, natural resources, and there's a lack of these people knowing how to farm. They've got issues and remember, they have to improve the land in 5 years, is all they have to do. So there's harsh weather. They're going to have, the soil is going to be tough. There's hardly any trees, and so they do not have lumber. Summers are hot, winters are cold. Storms come in and wipe out their attempts at farming. They're going to have insects like grasshoppers are going to devour everything. They're using wooden tools because there's just not a lot of lumber. So if you look down at that house, it's made by sod and grass, okay? They're making bricks out of soil and the prairie grass. So this is going to be known as the sod busters. Is kind of what they're going to become known as. And their roofs are going to leak, of course. They're going to have mud during the rainstorm. Snakes and insects are going to come through the walls. You could have a storm come through and wake up with your entire roof on you and have to dig yourself out of the mud. So just kind of look at that house and imagine trying to live in that and deal with the conditions that, are going to come from the weather. You're going to eventually have John Deere's steel plow. That's going to help a lot, and it's going to help cut through this thick sod that is the land out here in the Great Plains. So the homesteaders are going to face isolation. They're going to face unpredictable weather. They're going to have constant setbacks. So this promise of getting this 160 acres and all you have to do is improve the land in 5 years is going to become very difficult when they actually get there to attempt to do all of this because they're not farmers with this kind of land. They have never farmed this kind of land. They don't have the resources. And that's going to lead into some political movements we'll see in just a bit. All right, this is just talking about the Oklahoma land run, and those are actual pictures of it. And this is just in 1889, they had done the same. The government, the state of Oklahoma, had done the same thing. The land was part of an Indian territory, and they had thousands of hopeful settlers come to the border of the territory waiting for a signal. At noon, a gunshot rang out, and the race was on, and men, women, families, they all, moved forward on horseback trying to claim their 160 acres. They would plant a flag and claim their acres, and it was all under the Homestead Act. They had the 5 years to improve the land. So you had over 50,000 participate in this land run, and that is how they became known as the Sooners, the Oklahoma Sooners. Okay. All right. So as I was telling you a few slides ago, that these people get out there and they're trying to farm, they have little knowledge. The conditions are really hard, and they're trying to figure all this out. So this is where the Granger movement is going to start in 1867. So what it is after years of struggling and railroad rates were high, so when they could actually produce stuff to sell and move east, it was too expensive with the railroad rates. They weren't being regulated. So the farmers begin to realize that they all need to pull together. They need to work together to get anything done. So this is going to create the Granger movement in 1867. And so at first, the Granger movement was a social organization, a way for all of these isolated farmers, because they have 160 acres, so your neighbor is not right next door. All of these different farmers, they're going to come together in this community, and they're going to share ideas. They're going to share better ways of doing stuff. So that is how this begins. Okay, so they start having meetings, and they start kind of social networking. And then over time, this movement, which brings these farmers together who are sharing the same struggles, and they start to unite, and then they want to start to fight for fair treatment. Okay, so what's going to happen when they start to move from just being, okay, a community talking, upset about different things, sharing ideas, they move into an alliance. And that's called the Farmers Alliance, and that's in 1870. But this is just regional. It's local and regional, and it becomes more political, okay? So they organize and they create this political body. But again, it's local. It's regional. It's not national. So these groups of farmers, they start to bargain for lower prices. They sell their crops collectively, so they're not bargaining against each other, but they're together bargaining against the bigwigs, the people buying. They provide loans to each other for struggling farmers. They create a credit union. They push for government action to regulate railroad rates so they can move their product. Because the railroads would charge such outrageous fees to ship their crops, it wouldn't help the farmers at all. And so they're at the mercy of these powerful men, these powerful, wealthy men who control these corporations. So you have this group that started just to share ideas and to help each other out, how to make this work, improve their land, create a life. It moves into this political organization called the Farmers Alliance. That's local and regional, and they start fighting. Well, they realize that to really change things for them, they've got to take it higher. They've got to get it to the national level, to the presidential level. Okay, so they then create the Populist Party, which is the People's Party. So now this group that started just sharing ideas has become a political party on the national level, and that's in 1891. So the Populist Party is going to represent the farmers and other working class Americans at the national level. They're going to fight for big changes. They want to reduce the government control of the railroads. They want a graduated income tax, and they want direct elections of the senators. All right, so these ideas, they sound kind of radical at the time, but later they become law. So the Populist Party just is really showing up for ordinary people and demanding a voice in government. All right, so after the Civil War, there are over 5 million Texas Longhorn cattle in Texas. And what's going to happen is cowboys and cattle ranchers are going to come in and take these longhorns that nobody is claiming, take them and move them north. It's not important who takes the cattle, where the cattle are divided up. What's important with this part is how cattle ranching was done and the open range and then barbed wire. Okay, so open range is that these cowboys could move their cattle through whoever's acreage, basically huge yard. The cattle could eat the grass, and the cowboys would just keep moving them because they want to move them north to where, from Texas to Kansas, where they can meet up with the railroad. So the railroad could then ship the cattle east to the market, and the cattle would get slaughtered and sold. So the focus of all this is the actual cattle drives, which were when the cowboys moved the cattle to the railways. Okay, so a few things. The life of the cowboy was hard. They faced all different issues, harsh weather, stampedes, constant threat of people trying to steal the cattle. They had to keep the cattle, safe and well until they got them to Kansas for, to be sold. So the trail, the cattle trail, the Chisholm Trail is one of the important ones. You would have 10 to 15 cowboys moving up to 2,000, 3,000 cattle. It was a 12 to 16-hour job. They're sleeping under the stars. So it was a difficult job. And the American cowboy, that whole culture, that comes from Mexico. It is the Mexican cowboys who taught the American cowboys, I guess if you want to use that, all the skills, the traditions, everything about the cattle industry. All right. So the important thing is that at this time it is open range, which just means there's no fences. They can just move their cows. They could move them all the way to Canada if they wanted to on land that maybe people owned, but it did not matter. It was regardless of ownership. They could still move the cows across, from Texas to Kansas. So what happens is, and like I said, it's not as important who owns the cattle. It could be, small ranchers that have 1,000 cattle. What happens is in 1873, Joseph Gideon invents barbed wire. Okay, so what the big ranchers, the wealthy, are going to do is they're going to start to barbed wire their area, so when the cattle move, they can't move into their area, so they can't get to the railways. There's an issue there for the normal cowboy. So you have huge, large ranching capital investors, and they're going to create these corporations of ranches, and that's going to be a huge blow to the normal rancher. Okay, so what's important as far as testing is that at one time the cattle could move freely, and then you have these corporations come in with the invention of the barbed wire in 1873 that then allow these huge wealthy ranchers to barb wire off their land, and affects how the normal, small farmer could try and move his cows. Okay, so this is just like I was talking to you about before. The Mexicans had really had the entire cowboy culture, and they're going to teach the Americans how to cowboy. Okay, railroads, the growth of railroads. This is very important. After the Civil War, we're going to enter this period of just rapid industrialization, and the West is going to play a crucial role in that growth. So to push settlement and economic development and encourage ranch and farming and mining, because we have the gold mine in California, across the frontier, while you still have the factories in the east, they're going to depend on these raw materials that are coming from the west. So to do all of that, we need to connect the two, which the east and the west, which we're going to connect that through the railways. All right, so we have to have reliable transportation. So between 1863 and 1869, thousands of workers, most are immigrants, a lot of Chinese crews, they're going to face these dangerous conditions, discrimination, but they're going to lay a total of 1,912 miles of railroad linking the East Coast to the West Coast. This is going to be the Transcontinental Railway, which is a huge achievement. So it's going to create a journey from New York to San Francisco that once took months by wagon can now be completed in a week by the railroad. So this is going to create a huge boom. It's going to create a mining industry, coal, iron, and timber. It's going to have fuel factories back east, new technologies, mass manufacturing. You're going to have the telegraph. You're going to have communication, production. Just really creating a more efficient way to connect the east and the west markets. So the railroads reshape every bit of life. All right, so with everything going on, there is gold in California. The news is going to spread like wildfire, and you're going to have what is called prospectors, people hoping to find gold. They're going to start coming into California in 1849. These people are known as the 49ers because it's 1849. They're hoping to strike it rich, to find their gold. At the beginning, it's just different individuals coming in, mining. You have these boom towns that are going to start up, that people are going to create saloons, places to eat, places to get your clothing clean, all different, tools that you might need. But these little boom towns are going to have no laws. So they're going to have gambling, they're going to have drinking, and nobody is, you know, uh, creating any laws to protect anybody or to control any behavior. So they really become these lawless towns. But then you're going to have everything is going to be reshaped when you start having larger, more corporate miners coming in to these towns. You're going to start having more law and order. Okay, so one of the important things to remember about the gold mining is 1849, 49ers. Those were the very first people. And then it explodes, and you have these boom towns that are lawless. And later, you're going to have mining corporations come in and control the towns. You're going to have one interesting thing is to create things for these miners to wear that will hold up better with the job they're doing. That's where you're going to have your Levi's come in. And the famous jeans that everybody likes to wear, the Levi jeans, are going to come from this time period. So the other thing is the Chinese immigration and the Chinese Immigration Act. You have the Chinese immigrants who are really going to work this area. And then you're going to have in 1882, Congress is going to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act. And this is going to limit Chinese immigration. and it's not going to really change until 1943. So it's one of the longest immigration restrictions in America. So the Chinese Exclusion Act is definitely something that you will need for testing. All right, so the last slide is about, it's titled Indian Wars, Native Americans. And remember when we started this lecture, we talked about how all of the West was given to the Indians because it was not civilized enough for Americans to live on it. And then, of course, we move west and we take all the land. So, how does this affect the Indians? So, the Native Americans, of course, are going to fight back. It's not portrayed that way, but they do fight back. One of the events is going to be the Sand Creek Massacre, but this is where U.S. troops attack a peaceful Cheyenne village and they kill the people in the village, the tribe. You have the massacre at Wounded Knee. Hundreds of Lakota men and women and children are killed. Wounded Knee is important because it's going to mark the end of the Native American resistance in the West. So after all of the fighting, the government tries a new approach. We're going to try assimilation. And this is actually what you are tested on with STAR, is assimilation. Assimilation is they need to assimilate into the American culture as it's defined at this time. So in 1887, Congress passes the Dawes Act. Okay, the whole meaning of this act, because the Indians live in tribes, in communities, in these large family communities. So they need to break this up. Okay, this is not how the Americans live. They have families, but they have individualism. So it's meant to take individual families, the head of the household, give them land, encourage them to be individual farmers and not a member of the tribe. And through doing that, you just have to be good, you farm your land, act American, assimilate into the white man's culture, and after 25 years of proving yourself, you will get the land ownership and you'll get your citizenship rights. You'll become American after you prove yourself for 25 years. So, when you think of the Dawes Act, remember that it is breaking up. They're trying to break up the reservation. They're trying to break up the tribal system. They're pulling out people to individualize them and break up this tribe. Okay, so that is not going to work too well. So the land will be eventually, the Indians' land will eventually be sold and considered surplus land will be sold, good land will be sold to white settlers, and then land that's considered useless will be what the Indians are given. So the next thing is to assimilate. And this is what you are really tested on in STAR. And the idea of assimilation is to completely erase the culture of the Native Americans. So they're going to start, of course, with the children. And children are going to be sent off to these different schooling type activities. And they're going to try and Americanize the Indians. And you see that down here in the two pictures of the one man who has his long hair and is dressed in his culture and how he dresses, into short hair and more what would be considered an appropriate civilized look. So they're going to break up families. The schooling is going to be absolutely horrible for the children. They're going to be sent to boarding schools. Over the last few years, probably the last 5 years, evidence has been uncovered about how abused these children were in these schools, and they're going to be forced, beaten until they become English speaking Christian in the right vocation. Women are going to learn, girls are going to learn how to sew. And so this Americanization is what the solution will be for the Indian population and the Indian, problem, as they say. So the idea is kill the Indian, save the man. The policies aim to completely erase the identity and replace it with the American culture. All right, that is it.